In session 2, we're going to talk about immutability. That means that God never changes. Never changes. That's really difficult for you and I really to understand, because change is constantly happening to us all around our lives, whether with our parents, others, or ourselves personally. But we'd like to take that concept and we'd like to really share with you how it can apply to the hurts that are going on in your life. In this series, matter of fact, in all these sessions, you're going to hear stories that are real. They're not made up, this is not fabricated, but real life stories that we trust will connect to the topic that we're talking about. In this session right here, we're going to talk about what immutability is, and then hopefully we're going to answer the question, how does it apply to my life? How can this apply to the hurts that I am feeling and the issues that I have in my life? Where was God when? And we're going to answer that question tonight by talking about a subject called immutability. Now that's a kind of, for some of you, go, what word did you say? Immutability. And you know what it means? Very simply put, it means that God never changes. And I'm going to try to attach where was God when and find the answer in God's immutability, that God never changes. But as we say that, let's just stop for a second and ask the questions, why did this happen? Why did this happen? Why did God let some things happen? For example, where was God when my parents were getting a divorce? That I'm not developing as fast as other girls. I'm not as smart as they are. I didn't make the team. My good friend commits suicide. My pastor leaves because of sin. My grandma that I love dies. I was molested by a relative. I'm flunking a class I needed to pass. I got dumped by the guy who last night said he loved me. I got slapped so hard by my drunk dad that I fell to the floor. Where was God when I keep watching my mom get beat up by my stepdad? When I had sex? When I got bitter? When I get quick to be angry? Coming home to an empty house, my best friend, so-called Christian, stabs me in the back. Where was God when my dog that I had since I was born died? I got raped. I tried suicide. I got drunk. I feel alone in a crowd. Sometimes I don't care. I cut. I have a secret life that I regret. I stand up for truth and I get busted. The ideas of the Bible just don't work for me. I make a stupid comment to my best friend and now there's distance. My friends that I hang around with and they talk about me behind my back. I wonder why God is allowing me to go through this. Do you ever think of those questions? Hey, why does God allow children to get molested? Could God stop it? Yes, he could. Isn't God all-powerful? Isn't God all there knowing? Isn't God someone that never changes? And he's all these things we've heard about since Sunday school, since we were little. If God could stop it, then why didn't he? Some of you are here tonight, and that's the question that you're asking. You're saying, hey, look, how can I trust the God when I'm standing there and I'm watching my dad get drunk? I'm watching my younger sister get molested. Wow, where was God? Why could God stand there and watch that happen and not do anything? Where was God? Some of you say, that's good, Mr. Garland, and you're talking about that and everything, and maybe you're trying to connect, but do you really know what that's like? And I got to tell you, I do. I know a little bit about what it's like, asking God the why questions. Matter of fact, we have a video here that I want to show you that I sat down here a while ago and just kind of shared a little bit about my where was God when concepts.
You know, I love dating girls. I never got serious with any one of them. Hey, what guy does back when he's young? And yet, one day my mother wanted me to meet this girl. Right. I wanted to meet a girl that my mom wants to introduce me to. But I was home, and it was New Year's Eve, and we went to church, and she introduced me. Well, I hate to admit it, but she was pretty. She was smart, witty, and challenging, engaging, and we just hit it right off. I fell in love with Karen. And our relationship, though, went up and down. I mean, we got close, and then she backed away, and we got close, and she backed away. I was still in college. She was teaching at a Christian school. And she decided that she was going to go to Japan, and she was going to teach a couple missionary kids for a couple years, which I thought was great. But when she was gone, my heart broke, I had to tell her the truth. So I wrote her a letter and I told her that I loved her. But right at that time, she came up with some physical problems that complicated some things emotionally and spiritually, and she had to come home. And we began to talk. Well, I was a missionary at the time, and I was an hour and a half from home at a missions conference. After it was over, my dad and a lawyer friend of mine met me in the back. My dad took me down the office, and he told me that she put a noose around her neck, kicked a chair out, and she hung herself that morning. Did you ever had that knot in your stomach that you couldn't get rid of? Did you ever feel the pain so hard that you couldn't explain it to anybody? I felt that. I felt that rejection. I remember for weeks afterwards driving down the road and literally seeing her hanging from a noose calling out my name. Where was God? I was supposed to marry her. I loved her. Why did God let that happen?
To add to the story, as I was trying to grapple with the concept, a few weeks later, friends, and they meant well, I'm sure, said, "Hey, Rick, did you hear what else?" And I said, "No." They said that when Karen was hanging there, they found finger marks on her neck, that the last minute while she was choking, she changed her mind, but it was too late. You ever say, "God, how can you let one of your children do that? How could you do that? Why would God let that happen?" Happened almost 27 years ago. Still asking those questions. You say, "Well, Mr. Brown, how do you handle that?" Well, I'm going to show you tonight. We're going to grapple with that. I'm going to tell you how you can handle those hard questions. I believe God has an answer. Maybe not the answer you want, but God has an answer. And I think the answer is really found in God and the truth about God. And we're going to talk about the truth about God. Matter of fact, when we try to answer the why question that you can't answer, you know what I suggest? When you're trying to answer a why question that you can't answer, you got to look to the who. And look to the who. And you got to look to God, and we're going to look at God's attributes. Matter of fact, for 8 weeks, the snow camp, we're going to look at a different attribute every week. An attribute is a characteristic of God, what God's like. And tonight, we're going to look at God's immutability, that God never changes. Now, when we think about that God never changes, think about you. As I think about you and I, we change our mind, we change our clothes, we change our habits, we change our thoughts, change our ways, change our will, change our sleeping habits, we change our relationships, our grades, our teachers, our homes, our hairstyles, our hair color, our hair length, our cars, our jeans, our shoes, our presidents, our scenery, our weight, our height, our intelligence, our perspective, our situation, our status, our mood. We change. We're constantly changing. Listen to what I found. A human being loses an average of 40 to 100 strands of hair a day. A cough releases an explosive charge of air that moves up to 60 miles an hour. A sneeze is up to 100 miles an hour. Every human being spends a half an hour as a single cell. Each square inch of a human body has an average of 32 million bacteria on it. Yee. Talk about change. Humans shed 600,000 particles of skin every hour, about 1.5 pounds a year. By 70 years of age, an average person will have lost 105 pounds of skin. Nerve impulses to and from the brain travels as fast as 170 miles per hour. Your stomach needs to produce a new layer of mucus every 2 weeks or to digest itself. Your ears and nose continue to grow throughout your entire life. 15 million blood cells are destroyed by the human body every second. There's change going on all the time. You're changing. And here's the problem. You can't control it. Matter of fact, that's why some of you do some things that are really harming your body, because you figure, I can at least control that because I'm out of control and I'm trying to get control. Here's the secret. You can't get control because change is happening all the time. That's why we talk about God's immutability. Now, most of you heard about mutations. See, mutations are the random genetic changes that produce new offspring. Something is mutable if it is subject to change to any degree. Therefore, to be immutable means unchanging and unchangeable. And that's what we mean about God. Do you know, here's some interesting things. You know God does not learn anything? God does not learn. He doesn't have to learn anything. To learn something would mean that he would change. He does not grow. He is never surprised. Isn't that an interesting thought? God is never surprised. You can't do something, God go, whoops, that surprised me. I didn't know that. Oh, wow. I'm sorry, I was busy over in China. I didn't realize that. God is never surprised. God never improves. You can say it another way that he's immutable, and that is that God does not change who he is. Or another way is this. You can always use the word always to express this truth. God is always wise. God is always in control. God is always fair. God is always good. He's always holy. And God is always merciful. And he's also always loving. That's what we know about God. God never changes. God never changes. He's always wise, in control, fair, good, holy, merciful, and loving. We know that. You see, when you're grappling with something you don't know and you're trying to get some answers to it, let's go to what we do know. We know that God is these things, and he always is these things. Now, this next statement, when I read it, it didn't, the guy that wrote it said, man, this is the most incredible statement on the immutability of God I've ever heard. And I thought, yeah, but as I thought about it, this is one of these statements I'm going to show you in a minute that in about 2 days you're going to say, wow, that's really cool. But it sounds so simple. Ready? Here it is. Nothing ever happens to God. Now, that sounds so, Mr. Brown, what? You think about that. Nothing ever happens to God. It doesn't happen. Like today, things happen to you, right? You went to the tube-hill, or you happened to play basketball, you happen to eat. Nothing ever happens to God because God knows everything. God is, not only that, God never changes. He's immutable. You see, in God, no change is possible. In men, change is impossible to escape. You see, God, there's change is totally impossible to happen. Now, some of you say, well, wait a minute. But what about in the Bible it says where God repents or God changes his mind? But we're not going to get into that tonight. But if you study those passages, it doesn't mean that God changed. It doesn't mean God changed because God never changes. Well, let's look at some scriptural evidence tonight of this. What does the Bible say about God never changing? You ready? Psalm chapter 102, verses 25 through 27. It reads, "Oh, of old you founded the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. Even they will perish, but you endure. All of them will wear out like a garment. Like clothing you will change them, and they will be changed. But you are the same, and your years will not come to an end." Malachi 3:6. This is a great verse. It's right there. "For I, the Lord, do not change. Therefore, you, O sons of Jacob, are not consumed." And then Titus chapter 1, verse 2. "This truth gives them confidence that they have eternal life, which God, who does not lie, promised them before the world began." Now look at Hebrews chapter 6, verses 17 and 18. "God also bound himself with an oath, so that those who received the promise could be perfectly sure that he would never change his mind." Aren't you glad for that? So God hath given both his promise and his oath. These two things are unchangeable because it is impossible for God to lie. Therefore, we who have fled from him for refuge can have great confidence as we hold to the hope that lies before us. And then James chapter 1, verse 17. I love this verse. It says, "Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change." God doesn't cast a shadow as one would as you wait for the sun to change, it's time to change, because God does not change. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 12. "You will fold them like a cloak and discard them like old clothing, but you are always the same. You will live forever." And then another favorite verse, Hebrews 13, verse 8. "Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever." God never changes. God is immutable. God is the same. He never learns. He's always good. He's always holy. He's always just. He's always righteous. So that is what we know about God. But you're standing over here saying, wait a minute, but what about my hurt? Hey, what about that situation? If God is always holy, always just, then why did he let this happen? So how are we going to process this? How are we going to process this? How are we going to apply it to me? First of all, God's first thing you need to cling to is this: God's promises never change. James chapter 1, verse 12 says that he promised life. He promised life, an awesome, full, complete, total, out-of-this-world life. It says this: blessed is a man who perseveres under trial, for once he's been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. And you know what he says? I promise you an abundant, awesome, incredible life, not in this world, people, but in the world to come. And that's where we got to get our focus. There's an eternity out there. There's a forever out there. And in that forever world, he says, look, for those of you that persevere, for those of you that go after the crown of life, that go through the trials of this life, there's an awesome, full, complete, total, out-of-this-world life for you. Not only that, but he says that God's promises never change. God's promises never change. In Titus chapter 1, verse 2 says this, that he's promised a forever. He's promised a forever without pain, sorrow, and sickness and death. It says in Titus 1:2, it says, in hope of eternal life, which God, who cannot lie, promised from the beginning of the time. So he gives us a promised comforter, the Holy Spirit. He gives us a promised life that in the life to come will be awesome, incredible. We got something to look forward to. But he gives us a promise forever. He's promised that in the life to come, do you know what's so cool about heaven? There will be no more pain. There will be no more sorrow. There will be no more sickness and no more death. Everything that causes us to ask the why questions, think about that. God says, I'm going to wipe out. And that's a promise that I will not change. God's promises never change. But not only that, God's plan never changes. God's plans never change. We change our plans all the time. Think about how many times today you changed your plan. God says, I never change my plan. Psalms 33:11 says, but the Lord's plans stand firm forever. His intentions shall never be shaken. Isaiah 14:24, the Lord of hosts has sworn, saying, surely, just as I intended, so as it's happened. Just as I have planned, so it will stand. Philippians 1:6, and I'm sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. People, God has a plan for your life. He created you. He saved you. He has a specific, detailed plan for your life. And that plan will not change. Interesting. Someone said to me once, do you know when there's stress? Stress is when there's two agendas. Now, you all have parents, and you know what that's like. If your mom's got an agenda, and you don't like that agenda, and you got a different agenda, you know there's stress at home, right? Because when mama not happy, no one's happy at home. Well, God's got a plan for your life. You say, well, I don't know if I like that plan. I got my own plan. Listen, you can have a plan, and God's got a plan, but listen carefully. God's plan will not change. And you got stress in your life because there's two plans. I suggest changing yours because God's is not going anywhere. See, God's plan never changes. Not only that, we find that God's person never changes. God's person never changes. I love what A.W. Tozer says. Listen to this. He says, in coming to him at any time, we need not wonder whether we shall find him in a receptive mood. He is always receptive to misery and need, as well as to love and faith. He does not keep office hours, nor does he set aside periods where he will not see anybody, nor does he change his mind about anything. Today, this moment, he feels towards his creatures, towards babies, towards sick, the fallen, the sinful, exactly as he did when he sent his only begotten Son into the world to die for mankind. God never changes his moods or cools off his affections or loses his enthusiasm. Isn't that cool? You can go to God and never wonder if he's in a good mood. Now, you guys know that you got to be careful going to your mom, right? There's sometimes you don't go to your mother because you ask her a question, if she's not in a good mood, you're not going to get a good answer. Timing is everything, especially when it comes to moms. But you know what's so cool about God? He's never in a bad mood. God's never sad. He's never sick. He's never too busy. He doesn't keep office hours. He's always there, and he's always real. And you can always go to him. See, God's person never changes. But lastly on this part, look at this. God's passion never changes. God's passion never changes. In salvation, John 6:37b says this, and the one who comes to me, I will certainly not cast out. I will never reject one of them who comes to me. God's passion never changes. His invitation is open. And he loves you so much, and his grace is so abundant. He says, look, I love you. I don't care how dirty, rotten, filthy that you are. Man, my love is open for you to come. I want to forgive. But I'd be remiss if I don't remind you of this too. That it also says that those who reject Jesus Christ as their Savior will spend eternity in hell, and that will never change either. But not only God's passion never changes about salvation, God's passion never changes according to security. 2 Timothy 2:13, if we are faithless, do not believe, and are untrue to him, he remains true, faithful to his word and righteous character, for he cannot deny himself. Isn't that great? Even when we failed, even when we flunk, even when we are foolish, God says, hey, I will not fail you. I won't run away. I won't turn my back on you. I will be there for you. You've got security in a God who is passionately in love with you. God's passion never changes. So now what? Now what? Now what? Well, there's three things you can do. There's three things you can do with what we just said. Number one, you can compartmentalize. You can compartmentalize the truth. And what does that mean? That means suppress it. And you can be here tonight and say this, God changes his mind when he comes to this area of my life. Oh, I know God is right, and I know God's holy and just and loving and kind, but when it comes to this area of my life, when it comes to this problem in my life, when it comes to this suicide, when it comes to this molesting, when it comes to this issue, then God's got to obviously change his mind because he couldn't let this happen. And you just compartmentalize this issue, and you believe about God with all the rest of the issues. That's one thing you can do. The second thing that people do is this. They spiritualize it. They acknowledge the truth. But here's how they do it. Hey, God never changes, just deal with it, people. Hey, God never changes. He's holy, just, right, so just get over it. All right, so your mom and dad's marriage busted up. Just get over it. Hey, so you're molested when you're little. Just get over it. Just somehow they want to make you feel like just take this Bible and just cram it into your head somehow and just deal with it. But somehow that doesn't work for me. So may I suggest tonight the third way to process this in your life? And that's to internalize it. What are we saying? Believe the truth. What's the truth? Here it is. Here's the key. Tonight, will you level with God? Do you know that he's never threatened by honesty? Have you ever been honest with God about your hurt? I was speaking to a Sunday school class of teenagers once and said, did you ever feel like God made a mistake? Oh, yes. Did you ever feel like God blew it? Yeah. And I turned to one young lady and said, you did? She said, oh, yeah. I said, did you ever tell God that? And here was her answer, and she caught herself in the middle of her answer. She said, oh, no, I'd never tell God that. I said, why not? She said, because I don't want